everybody. Welcome to episode 15 of The Bitter Pill. It's been a while since I've done a video, and it's good to be back in front of the camera. Again, welcome to The Bitter Pill, the show where we take a look at bitter pills of truth that many people find difficult to swallow and that the corporate media doesn't want you to know exist. It's election season. The election is now 6 months away. So naturally, the sheepdogs have come out in full force to try to herd those of us who, in some sense or another, are on the political left into voting for this year's lesser evil Democrat, the racist, corrupt, warmongering sexual predator Joe Biden. So Bernie Sanders tells us that... Where does he say that? I'm not sure. But he tells us that it would be irresponsible if we don't vote for Joe Biden. The nation's resident feminist, quote unquote, Katha Pollitt, tells us that I would vote for Joe Biden if he boiled babies and ate them. He wasn't my candidate, but taking back the White House is that important. And this article is actually a smear piece on Tara Reade, the woman who accused Joe Biden of raping her back in the early 1990s. So basically, Katha's message for us is, don't you dare bring up Tara Reade's allegation as a justification for not pulling the lever for creepy Uncle Joe. Not what she calls him, but what I call him. Because Joe Biden is just a prince in the way that he treats women. We could go through some pictures and videos that suggest otherwise, but we won't get into that this episode. She tells us, Katha Pollitt does, that she takes women's allegations very seriously. But she doesn't take this one seriously, and she doesn't mention any of the, I think it's about 10 or so now, other allegations of sexual misconduct of some sort, including a couple more assault charges against Joe Biden. She doesn't mention those, so what do you think? Does she take those seriously? Maybe not. Anyway, that's a tale for another video, which will be coming relatively soon. So the latest sheepdog to join the pack is Cenk Uygur, founder of the Young Turks YouTube show, which you can also find on a few different cable channels, I guess, who tells us that Joe Biden has 1,000 problems. I'll fight like hell to move him toward progressive positions. I'll almost certainly help to primary him in 2024. But not voting is still taking action. It doesn't make you morally superior to those who make hard choices. It might do the opposite. So shame on you, right, for not making the quote-unquote hard choice and voting for Joe Biden in November to keep Trump from winning another term, right? Everybody knows that if you don't vote for Biden, you're electing Trump, right? Although by that same logic, if you don't vote for Trump, are you electing Biden? I don't know. Seems like the same logic to me. So naturally, Cenk's tweet didn't go unresponded to. Kyle Kulinski replied, wait, so I might be morally inferior for not picking one of two corrupt war criminals? Am I reading this right? Cenk went full Godwin in response. That is, someone once coined Godwin's law, somebody named Godwin, I guess, coined Godwin's law, which says that if you have a political discussion long enough, somebody's going to bring up Hitler and try to draw some sort of analogy to straw man the other person. Yes, you are reading that right. George Bush and Adolf Hitler are both war criminals. Are you saying that not voting for either in an election between the two is the morally correct position? Because it most definitely isn't. Come on the show and let's have a real discussion on it. So, I doubt that Cenk will have me on his show because unlike Kyle Kulinski, I'm not a well-known YouTube podcaster or co-founder of the Justice Democrats, an organization that tries to reform the Democratic Party, although maybe, hopefully, fingers crossed, Kyle is starting to give up on that idea now and joining those of us who favor independent political action. So anyway, back to this story. What I'd like to say to Cenk, if he did have me on his show, is this. Cenk, open up a damn history book, dude. Because, your position is very historically ignorant. Germans did vote against Hitler for the German equivalent of Bush, i.e. Otto von Hindenburg. And look what happened. Not only did fascism not come to power by voting, as it never does, but actually voting didn't stop it from coming to power. In fact, Hitler lost the 1932 presidential election to Hindenburg, 53% to 37%. And the spoiler candidate, Ernst Thälmann of the German Communist Party, got 10%. So, we're close to, making a difference in the outcome of the election, given Hindenburg's overwhelming victory. Not that any communists would likely vote for the German equivalent of Bush anyway. But in any case, it's definitely not the fault of German voters who refused to vote for Hindenburg that Hitler came to power. Because, there you can see. So whose fault is it? Well, there's lots of blame to go around, including a fair bit of blame on squabbling between the Communist Party and the Socialist Party, but also, lots of German capitalists thought maybe fascism would be a good idea in Germany right now. Let's smash those workers. But one person who's definitely at fault is President Hindenburg. In the face of a rising fascist movement that was brutalizing and killing workers in the streets, smashing unions and so forth, and the Nazis winning a plurality, not a majority, but a plurality in the elections to the Reichstag, German's parliament, Hindenburg appointed Hitler to what was at that time the second most powerful position in Germany, Chancellor. Today it's the most powerful position. So the next year, in February and March of 1933, in reality what happened was that through a combination of undoubtedly unconstitutional parliamentary maneuvering and just sheer brute force, the Nazis seized power, and Adolf Hitler became the president and basically dictator of Germany. In reality, it is really hard to think of any exceptions to the general rule that fascism only comes to power by force. And that's what happened in Germany. That's what happened in Italy and Spain during that same era prior to World War II. It's also what's happened in various military coups that our own U.S. government has backed, such as the one in Brazil in 1964, the one in Chile in 1973, where the democratically elected socialist president Salvador Allende was assassinated, and Augusto Pinochet seized power, General Pinochet. Ukraine in 2014, same thing. And Bolivia in 2019. Fascists seized power by overthrowing the elected Social Democrat Evo Morales just last fall. So it's hard to avoid the conclusion that what Cenk is really up to here is that he's trying to scare us into voting for Biden in order to defeat Trump by invoking the specter of Adolf Hitler. But despite his right-wing bigoted leanings, Trump is not a fascist ideologue. And there's not a fascist movement in the United States, anything on the scale of what existed in Nazi Germany in the 30s. Certainly, you could argue that the Christian right in this country is pretty fascistic, but again, we don't have anything like what there was in Nazi Germany in the early 1930s. And we have to keep in mind, too, that the fascist movement in Germany ultimately got the backing of much of Germany's ruling class. Many industrialists, many capitalists, and in fact, many members of what later became the Christian Democratic Union, one of the two major parties that exists today. By European standards, it's kind of a center-right party, but really the Christian Democratic Union is pretty equivalent politically to today's Democrats, and many of the leading members, including the Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, that took power after World War II, were literally involved with the Nazis, supporters of the Nazis. So if fascism ever comes to power in the United States, heaven forbid, we can fully expect that more than a few of the same sorts of politicians that Cenk supports today, lesser evil center-right Democrats, will in fact support it. So let's dispense with cartoonish versions of history and other scare tactics and think about how the working class can build real political power in the United States, including a workers' party. It doesn't work. That can act in working people's interests instead of relying on politicians like Joe Biden, whose loyalty is to the ruling class, not the working class, obviously. That's happened in other countries, as I'll talk about some other time. In Canada and the UK, the emergence of single-payer healthcare in those countries was a result of the formation of strong third parties. So I wanted to make this video short and sweet and focused on this brief look at German history that Cenk's screed on Twitter brought to mind. So I'm not going to get into the history of independent politics today. But I have been writing about it some recently. I'll put some links in the video description, and I'll definitely be covering that here too in the future. But for now, so long. I will see you next time.